Hi, welcome to Minutes with Mickey, a time for us to wonder about the story that we are entitled The Calming of the Storm. And actually, we have two stories here that we find in Mark chapter 4, Luke chapter 8, and Matthew chapter 8. I do hope that you will go into the text and take a look at these stories as they are written in the Synoptic Gospels, as each of the Gospel writers takes a look at it just a little bit differently. I find that there's some very interesting parallels between these two stories. Both stories have to do with change of circumstances. Both stories have to do with responses to fear. Both stories have to do with Jesus' power. The first story is Jesus' power and authority over the natural world, and the second story is Jesus' power and authority over the supernatural world. And as a result of that, then as I look at these stories, I have a couple of questions, things that I wonder about that aren't as clear as I wish they were. Let's take the first story, for example. The disciples are filled with fear when the storm comes upon them, and they rush to Jesus and they say, "Save us, do something, and why are you not worried that we're all going to die?" I wondered, what was it they expected Jesus to do? Were they simply thinking that Jesus should get up from his sleep and help them throw things overboard, sort of like what was the tradition when a storm comes on, you try to get rid of things? Remember that from Jonah? What were they expecting him to do? They were filled with fear, they were frenetic, and Jesus addressed both things. First of all, he addressed the storm, and he just simply spoke to the wind and the waves, and he said, "Be still," and they were still. And then he turned to the disciples and said, "Why were you afraid? Where was your faith?" And then he went back to sleep. So there's a chastisement here for the disciples not understanding that wonderful thing that God has been telling his people all throughout history. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you wherever you go. If the Lord is with you, who can be against you? Why should I be fearful? And so there was an addressing there of that. Why are you fearful? Let's trust the Lord. I also wondered, how loud did Jesus have to shout in order to get the wind and the waves to obey him? Did he just say it offhandedly, or did he have to make some sort of big production out of it? It doesn't really say, and I'm sort of curious about that. But here we have the disciples. After Jesus does take care of the storm, which is what they kind of asked him to do when they woke him up, "What are you going to do? Save us." And he took care of it. They were then amazed at the result. And they said, "Who is this man who has the wind and the waves obey him?" They recognized Jesus' authority over the natural world, over everything that was in nature. And it surprised them. And it reminded me oftentimes of how it is with us. When we beg for the Lord to save us from certain circumstances, and when he does, we go, "Wow, how did that happen?" We sort of are surprised by the fact that God answers prayer. I guess that's just part of human nature. Well, let's take a look at the second story, because in this story we see Jesus' authority over the supernatural. And the question I have here comes right out of scripture, actually, because in the Matthew passage, in Matthew chapter 8, when the demonic man comes out of the hills and approaches Jesus, here's what the man says. "What have you to do with us, Son of God?" And that's why we know it was many demons that was possessing this man. "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" Before the appointed time. So there must be some appointed time that these demons already know about that is the end of their existence, and this encounter is before that. So they are aware of Jesus' authority over them supernaturally. I just find that really fascinating. And what appointed time is that? And maybe we get clues for that towards the end in the book of Revelation and as Jesus speaks of the end times. However, right now at this point, these demons are fully aware of who Jesus is, and they have to ask him permission as to where they want to go next. They don't want to go to the abyss. They ask to go into these pigs. Why does Jesus, that's my wonder question now, why does Jesus allow them to do that? Why does he go along with their request? What was the purpose of it? And I think maybe that's something that you'll have to sit and think about and answer yourself. But here's the next thing that I noticed, is that when the man is healed of these legions of demons, he is calm and in his right mind and dressed and sitting in the community listening to Jesus speak. And this calm is what causes people fear. They are so afraid of the end result, they don't rejoice that Jesus has healed this man. Instead, they are fearful and they ask Jesus to leave. So it's almost like it's a mirror image of the storm. The first story, we have the storm that causes the disciples fear. They ask Jesus to save them, and then comes the calm. We have really chaos going out here in the catacombs, and the man rushes to Jesus, and then there's chaos involved with the pigs running over the hills, and then there's calm, and that's what brings fear to these people. They were so used to that man out in those catacombs that they didn't even care. It was part of their community. They just were living with it all the time. And then, because it changed their community, the calm came into their community. That's what caused fear for them. And their response was, Jesus, we don't want anything to do with you. Isn't that interesting? It was something that popped up at me probably for the first time, is to see this I don't know, maybe mirror imaged, or the way these parallels are, and what does that mean? And then Jesus tells the man not to come with him, but to stay in that community and explain the grace and the mercy that God has shown him. And as John mentioned in his insights, we have evidence that there were many churches from that region for that man who stayed in his own community, who were fearful, and yet he was able to share the good news of Jesus Christ. So does that mean for us? What are the other wonder questions that you have? I wonder about, what is my response when things go crazy in my life? When fear enters in, do I trust God? Do I rest in that? Or am I afraid of those changes? What's God saying to you? Have a great week.